My friends, there was going to be a countdown there. I don't know yet which buttons to push, but welcome to the Bike Lane on a Monday night at 6:30 p.m. And I am your host, Tom Ziska, in the Fox 26 studios tonight. We get around on the Bike Lane, typically on two wheels. Glad to have you with us. So tonight, we're going to talk about biking to work, cycling to work. May is a kind of National Bike Month, if you will, and this Friday, the 19th, is National Bike to Work Day, and there are some events in Houston to demonstrate how that goes. To talk about it with us, I'm going to bring in Joe Cutrufo. He's the executive director of Bike Houston, the bike advocacy group here in the city. Joe, it's good to see you as always. Thank you for your time.
Great to be here, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Bike to Work Day in Houston. It comes this Friday. It's largely a demonstration thing to show people, to get people thinking of giving this a go. Talk about it.
I like to think of Bike to Work Day or Bike to School Day or Bike to Anywhere Day as sort of the gateway drugs of the bike movement. Sometimes people need just a little taste of what it can be like to try a different type of commute, regardless of where you're going. So Bike to Work Day, it doesn't really mirror what an actual commute would look like because you're riding with a big group and probably a police presence and that sort of thing. But it can help you break out of the habit of driving to work every day. So if you're trying to figure out how can I bike to work, how can I find a safe route, this is one way to do it.
So before we get too far into this, I want to run a story that you and I did just a year ago for Bike to Work Day, because there are people out there who are thinking it's just too dangerous to ride on Houston roads, and they're not entirely wrong. There is a conversation to be had about that. So it's about a minute and a half, and we'll come back after that. For cyclists, the annual ride to Houston City Hall for Bike to Work Day is a great demonstration of what's possible for those who want to turn to two wheels to get around. TxDOT says in Houston, 2.7% of commuters are walking or riding their bikes to work, but it can be dangerous as well. In 2020, 31 cyclists were killed on Houston streets, and the bike advocacy group Bike Houston has mapped hundreds of injuries and fatalities over the last 2 years.
A lot of folks would love to ride a bike more, but we just lack the infrastructure for them to feel safe doing so.
Bike Houston Executive Director Joe Cutrufo says there have been improvements, especially inside the 610 loop, where dedicated and protected lanes are being added for cyclists. And this intersection near Rice University was redesigned after 2 cyclists were killed by drivers here. But increasing traffic and in some cases driver indifference is too much for some. Jack Gutweiler and his wife both ride, and they've discussed the wisdom and safety of setting out on the roads.
The question of being on the road with vehicles has gotten to be a bigger and bigger concern.
Houston can be one of America's most bike-friendly cities, but we need to invest in infrastructure. We need to invest in safe streets. We need to make sure that people can get where they need to go on a bike, not just in a car.
So let's talk about some of those things. There's a lot to unpack. Joe Cutrufo from Bike Houston. So that was a year ago. How different is it 12 months on from the dynamics that we discussed then?
I'm not that different. I'm actually wearing the same shirt as I was wearing in that interview. So.
I didn't want to bring that up, but since you do, okay.
Not much has changed.
Though.
Thanks. In more ways than one, not a whole lot has changed. Riding a bike in Houston can be a joyful and convenient way of getting around, but it can also be like swimming with sharks. It depends on where you are. It depends on the traffic conditions. It depends on a few different things. But since I came to Houston 2.5 years ago, I have found it to be, in many ways, one of the most bike-friendly cities I've ever been. But that says a lot about, just the neighborhoods where I do most of the riding that I do. I live inside the 610 Loop, and I work inside the 610 Loop. And if you're reasonably familiar with streets in that area, it can be a pretty good experience on a bike. You get outside of that, or you try to ride on some of the major corridors, like Richmond or Kirby or Almeida, then you're dealing with a much different situation. Most of our major thoroughfares are not very bike friendly at all. So we've got a really long way to go, but we've made pretty remarkable progress too over the last year.
You talk about those various and sundry routes. I think it's important to note that the people who are cycling to work come in all shapes and sizes and circumstances as well. Certainly, there are experienced, seasoned riders who want to take advantage of the health benefits, but there are people for whom this is an absolute necessity. This is their way, their only way to get from point A to point B.
I mean, it's sort of a situation where you have people who have no other choice but to get on a bike because work is too far from home to walk. Maybe they don't have a car is broken, or they would drive if they could afford one. It's probably a situation where transit is either not going, like the bus routes, or the bus routes that do go there run really infrequently, which is the case for a lot of bus routes. So, yeah, if you're riding a bike for daily transportation and there's no dedicated bike infrastructure around, then that's what I mean when I say it can be like swimming with sharks. You're at the mercy of people driving multi-ton motorized vehicles, and when you do that, it's always the multi-ton motorized vehicle that wins. When you have no other protection other than a driver who is really space, 3 to 6 feet of space when they pass you, or if you have a wide shoulder or a useful sidewalk that you can ride on as sort of a last resort piece of quote unquote bike infrastructure, you can use that. But most of the city's designed for cars, and cars don't.
Along those lines, it seems to me that really on so many levels, and not just against cyclists, but we are increasingly becoming less and less accommodating of things that might inconvenience us. So in terms of cyclists, there's a real animosity and a real aggression toward them from people who are in cars and trucks. Do you think?
I think there's a certain level of animosity that's reserved for people outside of cars and trucks, but I think drivers, and I mean, I own a car too, I drive sometimes too. I think drivers have a level of animosity for everyone else but themselves, regardless of how they're getting around. For other drivers, but also for pedestrians and cyclists. I think when it comes to people on bikes, you look at them, drivers look at them and say, there's someone who's cheating. There's someone who's able to get around just about as fast as I can, yet they don't have to deal with the same stresses that come with driving a car. I think it'd be great to have T-shirts that say something like, "Join us." You'd be a lot happier on a bike. People may not realize it, but even though maybe we have to deal with the elements a bit more, it can be a lot more enjoyable just to move your body a little bit and not think about the stress of traffic. But yeah, I mean, to your question, is there animosity towards cyclists? Yeah, I mean, we've all experienced it. It doesn't take long, even if it's your first week commuting by bike. Chances are you've probably been close past, or you've had some other expletives shouted at you, or maybe unintentionally a driver has cut you off, or right hooked you, and when you're trying to go straight through an intersection and they make a right turn. Or something I see all the time is drivers looking at their phones. You can see that a lot more clearly when you're on a bike than when you're in a car. You can just see inside of other people's cars much more easily, and a lot of people on phones.
I will note that before we get too far, for anybody who hears this and says, but what about those darn cyclists? It's incumbent upon all of us to follow the rules of the road. Stop signs, stop signals, signaling your intentions if you're going to go one way or the other. These are all important elements to follow, and important to acknowledge to the four-wheeled rider that the two-wheeled riders need to follow all the rules too.
we all have a duty to one another on the streets to, um, to respect one another, or to at least try to. We have a duty
Yeah.
to one another to keep each other safe. Of course, I can't do a whole lot of damage to somebody inside an F-250 from my bike, but they can do a whole lot of damage to me. So I agree with you. We all share the same rights and responsibilities, but I think reasonable people can agree when somebody in a car or a truck speeds, runs a red light, doesn't yield when they're supposed to, they have the ability to kill me very easily. I really can't do that to somebody in a car with my bike. Does
The
it
stakes are
annoy
certainly
you?
higher.
Stakes are a lot higher. Does it
Yeah.
annoy you to see somebody roll through a stop sign on a bike? Maybe, but they're also not polluting the air. They're also not damaging the roads. There's a lot that they're not doing that you are doing when you're in a car. So, and one of those things is presenting an existential threat to the people around.
Let's talk a little bit about the Houston Bike Plan. It's a blueprint for a lot of things, a lot of moving pieces, if you will, to add roughly 18, or make sure when it's complete, roughly 1,800 miles worth of cycling opportunities. What will is there to make that happen?
I think there's a lot of will, but it's sort of like that saying about value, right? Don't tell me what you value, but show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value. And in this case, we've laid out the blueprint, but we don't have a whole lot of funding, at least within the city of Houston, to fund the bike plan. And not that that's a knock on the city, really. We know that the city has a revenue cap. We know that they've been using creative ways to build bike infrastructure through partnerships with tourism management districts, with Metro, and certainly with Harris County. Notably, Harris County Precinct 1, Commissioner Rodney Ellis has invested more than anybody in bikeways in Houston. So, the bike plan is, like you say, a blueprint, and it's sort of a guide that helps the city of Houston figure out where are the useful bike routes and how can we make them better. How can we make existing bike routes that are merely signs on the road, high comfort bikeways, where you have physical protection between people on bikes and people in cars, where you have what we call like neighborhood greenways, which would be streets that are comfortable enough for most people to quote unquote take the lane, where you often see signage and shared lane markings that would say this is a low speed, low traffic street. You see those types of streets all around. So anyway, the bike plan is a blueprint. We're nowhere close to the 1,800 miles, but on the flip side of that, we're also a lot closer to the 1,800 miles than we were in 2017 when the bike plan was put together. And you give a lot of people credit for that, but I think chief among them, Mayor Sylvester Turner's been a real champion for this kind of stuff. If not with the funding to make it happen, with the ability to greenlight the projects that others are paying for.
Let's talk real quickly, because I know there's some stuff happening in the coming days that we want to talk about. But if someone's inspired by the idea, all right, I'm going to give it a go. Talk briefly about the considerations for the logistics, not necessarily the safety, but the logistics of saying, I'm going to cycle to work and I'm going to be productive when I get there, and then I'm going to ride the bike back.
Riding the bike back is the key, because if you got there safely and you weren't shaking by the time you arrived at work and you're willing to get back on it, I think that's a success story. But I say that only half joking. My bike commute is not great either, and I actually chose where we put our office. I use part of Main Street where there's 6 lanes of traffic in Midtown Houston, and it's not Midtown, I guess that's the Museum District. Pretty terrifying some days with pretty high-speed traffic, buses, trucks, all that sort of stuff, highway on-ramps. If you're thinking about switching from a car commute to a bike commute, the most important thing to do first is to figure out what a safe route for you is. Chances are it's not the most direct route. And that's sort of the story of riding a bike in Houston, and really in most American cities. The most direct route is the route that cars use, and then bicyclists often have to ride parallel streets or go circumnavigate a few hazards along the way. Maybe you live, maybe you work downtown and you live in somewhere northwest, Garden Oaks or the Heights. Lucky for you, there's Bayou Greenways that can help you get to work. Maybe you're working in the Med Center and you live somewhere reasonably close to Gray's Bayou. You're really lucky because you can pretty much ride all off street along Gray's Bayou and the Greenway trails there to get to the medical center. So, there's a lot of sort of bike superhighways that we have thanks to the Bayou Greenways. Columbia Tap Trail is another good one that connects to basically the medical center up to downtown through Third Ward and East Downtown. So we have a few of these, off-street paths that can be really useful transportation infrastructure. But then it's, Houston is a really bike-friendly city, or can be a really bike-friendly city, until you get to, say, a street that has 6 lanes and the signalized crossings are far and few between. I noticed we don't really put our traffic signals too close together here. I'm not sure what the reason for that is, but sometimes you have to go out of your way to get to a signal where you can feel reasonably safe crossing a busy street.
Yeah, and then there's the logistics of making sure that you've got clothes and able to clean up when you get where you're going, so that you're presentable for the meeting that you're cycling to, and all of that. It just takes some forethought ultimately. And
Totally.
I was sharing with you, and I'll share with the people who are watching a brief anecdote that some years ago I did as a demonstration. I cycled back and forth from my home in Katy to our studios here near the Galleria area. In total, Monday through Friday, it was almost 200 miles worth of work. But I came in and I pre-positioned all my clothes so that they were waiting for me. And lucky enough to have a shower here so I could get cleaned up. The only real problem was the mental concentration to watch out for all the traffic. The actual riding and the actual process of cleaning up and doing my job, that wasn't really a big deal. It was just being aware of one's surroundings and making sure that you got to point A, point B safely.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff has been studied too. When we talk about the barriers to getting on a bike, number one across the board is always traffic safety. That's the biggest hurdle for most people. Number two, do I have a secure place to put my bike? Some buildings, a growing number of buildings, have secure bike storage inside the building. That's a really nice thing to have. But we also shouldn't think of it as a really nice thing to have, because people who drive to work, they expect that. So we should expect that too. And then showers and having a place to keep your clothes, like a locker room or something like that. Again, if you're driving to work, the whole thing has been designed around you. You have a place to put your car, a secure garage or a secure lot or something like that. And, you have air conditioning in your car. So if you're walking from the car into the office, that's all the sweating you're going to do. But, on a bike, whether it's sweat or rain or cold or something like that, the elements, that's another top barrier to getting on a bike. But there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. So I highly recommend, if you're gonna commute by bike, think about what you're wearing, think about what you're changing into, but also think about some of the equipment that can help make a bike commute more comfortable. A road bike that's really lightweight, that doesn't have a whole lot of places to attach accessories, isn't the best commuting bike. It might be really fast, but it's not as comfortable over long distances as a commuter bike or a touring bike. Probably doesn't have clearance for thick enough wheels to give you a little bit of cushion along that long ride, especially on Houston streets. And then, of course, most road bikes don't have places to attach things like racks, fenders, where you want to attach your bags that you bring your clothes in or anything like that.
It's a utilitarian experience that you need to think about.
Yeah, and now if you wanted a commuting bike, you'd probably want to look for something labeled like a commuter bike or a city bike or a hybrid maybe.
Mm-hmm. And this quick statistic, it's roughly, if your travel distance is 3 miles or less, we'll just point this out, you can get there on a bike faster typically than you can a car. It's just the way it is. So,
and can I add, 50% of trips taken in the United States are 3 miles or less. That's not bike trips, of all trips.
Yeah.
50% of the trips we take are 3 miles or less. So, if you talk about, hey, why don't you try biking? Or, hey, why don't we build some bike lanes? People will scoff and they'll say, well, how are you going to bike to this? Or how are you going to carry that on a bike? And it's like, not all my trips are 20 miles. Most of them are pretty full. And if you think about your day-to-day activity, your commute might be your longest trip. Maybe you travel 15 miles to work or something like that. That's a pretty long trip on a bike, but it's not insurmountable. But most of your trips, grocery store, pharmacy, doctor's offices, schools, whatever, friends' houses, probably a lot closer to 15 miles.
All true. Hey, before I let you go, since the month of May is just getting started, really, next week is the Houston Bike Summit, 3 days of fun and frolic, if you will. What have you got going on?
Yeah, so we got an exciting lineup this year. On Monday, May 22nd, we've got the Houston Bike Summit movie night. We're going to be screening a documentary called The Street Project at Axelrad Beer Garden in Midtown 3rd Ward area near Houston Community College. We're going to be projecting the movie right onto the side of the building, so it's going to be a pretty cool outdoor film screening, followed by a panel discussion moderated by Jade Jordan from Axios, which will be focused on the movie, which is an exploration of the movement to make American cities safe for walking and biking. Then on Tuesday, May 23rd at 3 p.m. at Match, that's Midtown Arts Theater Center of Houston, in Midtown, we've got bike law attorney Charlie Thomas, who specializes in bike crashes and that sort of thing. He's going to be giving a keynote and Q&A all about his stories from his many cases. He's represented over 100 cyclists in Texas and Louisiana. He's like any trial lawyer should be. He's a great storyteller. He's got some stories that'll blow your mind. And then the main event is the Houston Bike Summit Soiree, which is happening on the evening of Wednesday, May 24th at St. Arnold Brewing. We've had it at St. Arnold in past years. St. Arnold has like the biggest MS 150 bike team, which I know you rode this year, Tom.
I did.
And so St. Arnold's a great partner, very bike-friendly business, great bike parking there. So we're having it in their beer hall on the second floor. It's a fundraiser for Bike Houston, but we're also going to have an expo with a lot of like-minded organizations, some bike industry folks. We've got a live auction for the first time ever with bikes from Trek, Cannondale, Edo Bike Co., Gazelle, and others. And then we've also got Mayor Sylvester Turner is going to be there as our honoree. It's his last year in office, and we want to say thank you to him for his leadership over these last 7+ years in Houston's, he calls it a paradigm shift towards a multimodal city. And we want to make sure that we get all the mayoral candidates in the room too. We've invited all of them. We want to get them in there so they can see all the good work that's happened, see all the enthusiasm around this, and make sure that we don't backpedal with the next administration, that the next mayor who comes in takes what the current mayor has done and builds upon that foundation.
See what you did with the terminology, backpedaling. Nice. It was a lot of information. I will tell folks that all of these details can be found at bikehouston.org, which is very simple, bikehouston.org. There are maps, there are resources about cycling, and certainly information about the Bike Summit, which is next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And I will also tell folks that in a subsequent version of the Bike Lane, we'll talk about just how to learn how to ride in traffic. I think that's an important thing, and it scares a lot of people. But it's not as difficult once you make that leap in your mind. So we'll get you there as well. Meantime, Joe, thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it, carving out a little bit of time on a Monday night. So I'll let you get back to your family. So thanks to Mrs. Joe and to Joe's kids for carving out a little bit of this time. Joe, thanks very much. We'll see you next time. All right.
It's been a pleasure, Tom. Thanks so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And my friends, that is it for the Bike Lane tonight. You can bike to work if you want to. If you want to see the demonstration, go to the City of Houston website. There's a demonstration Friday. It's a slow ride from Edo to City Hall There's lots of protection, lots of riders, so it's an opportunity to get comfortable and just see how it goes. And hopefully the weather cooperates as well. So thanks for checking in, riding within the lines of the bike lane. I'm your host, Tom Ziska. Until we meet again, we're going to wrap it up. We'll see you next time. Rock on.